For my prominent book, I decided to talk about the Bible Unearthed, archaeology's new vision of ancient Israel and the origin of its sacred texts. This is written by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silverman. This book is broken up into three different sections, each catered towards a different part of archaeological studies of Israel. The final two parts they kind of go together as a historical understanding of what happened in different biblical stories, the time periods. But the first part, they really took some time just to kind of talk about the questions that everyone always has when it comes to biblical archaeology. These questions are: who are the patriarchs of Israel? Did Exodus occur? The conquest of Canaan, how did that take place? What happened there? Who actually were considered Israelites? Things like that. And so they decided to start off by just kind of clearing the air, as one will say. So they kind of touched these hot topics, did more of a topical dive before they decided to get into the nitty-gritty of the rest of the book. So that leads us to part 2 and part 3. Both of these are lined up to talk about the history of Jerusalem from about 930 BCE all the way down to 440 BCE. The point of this is to kind of just walk through what happened historically and give their own take through of biblical stories, what happened, as well as the history and how the archaeology informed that. So they really present this archaeological discovery that then is supplemented by their commentary, putting different thoughts and words towards it. One thing I really appreciate about this text in particular is that Finkelstein and Silberman, they are very cautious as to how they word things. You're not going to see things like certainly or we know or things like that. They understand that there's a lot of nuances that come with archaeology, and again, we weren't there. So they often are saying things, such as this may suggest or may seem as so, to kind of elaborate more so they might be experts on the topic, but no one truly knows. So this humility really helps things progress in a natural way that helps to at least give an unbiased appearance. A lot of books, when I was trying to find a book, are all saying, archaeology proves the Bible's true, or archaeology disproves the Bible, and these two are very, very cautious in saying that it's not important whether we're proving or disproving the Bible. They just want to provide information. A little about the authors. Finkelstein, he is a American archaeologist, and so is Neil Cyberman. And they both did a lot of studies in Jerusalem. My paper has disappeared from in front of me, so I don't remember this part. One of them studied at Wesleyan University. The other one studied at Tel Aviv University. Both of them were archaeologists who spent a lot of time out in Israel. So they have first-hand experience of everything happening, which really just attributes towards their credibility. For my prominent article, I decided to write about Max Miller's Old Testament History and Archaeology. This is found in the Biblical Archaeologist Journal in 1987. In this text, Max Miller does a wonderful job providing a comprehensive experience of what it's like to be an archaeologist trying to understand the Old Testament history and just ancient Israel. In this text, it provides a unique twist where he uses Palestinian studies, Palestinian archaeological studies, to then provide a framework for what he would call the 3 stages of archaeology. He is more focused on archaeologists and less focused on the actual findings in this paper because he wants to explain the nuances that archaeology can bring. Just as we as biblical studies people often see like different pieces of scripture, and we say that I can read this passage, you can read the same passage, but we'll come to different conclusions. Though both those conclusions might be holy and perfect for what God's wanting to reveal here, it all depends on the season that we're in which dictates what we see in that. That's very similar to what Max is doing here with archaeologists. There are certain digs and spots where you would think, how could this archaeologist not see this thing? And it's like, well, they just weren't looking for it. So he explains this in 3 phases. The first phase is simply archaeology existing just to try to prove the Bible. There is not much other reason behind that. It was going into the field with the framework of the Bible and figuring out how can we take what we find in these historical locations and how can we make that fit into our biblical text. So this, as you can tell, is not necessarily a very unbiased way of doing the study because, of course, we have our own perception of how the Bible happened. And then we're trying to prove it with that creates some problems. But that was kind of the start of it all. And then as we enter the second phase of archaeology, we then begin seeing people who are focused on just what things looked like, what things kind of were like back in the time. So that's where you start seeing more diving into looking at archaeology, looking at architecture, looking at the architecture of stadiums and buildings and homes, and trying to figure out what does this tell us about the early people's lives. Similarly, then you see them looking into pottery as well, saying, what can this pottery tell us about these dates? The third phase that he brings up is then simply saying how over the years innovation has occurred to create better, more succinct archaeological practices. We can find more things and miss less. So these phases are all just kind of highlighting simply what changes over archaeology and how different people are going to find different things in those times. Speaking about Max Miller and talking about who he is, he used to be a professor at the Candler School of Theology of Emory University. He was an archaeologist for a very long time on the staff in the Museum of Natural History. And he is also an Old Testament scholar. So you can tell that he definitely has some understanding of the time and understanding of the history, and that he kind of took his love for archaeology and combined those two to create his portfolio. For my prominent website, I decided to write about the Bible Archaeology Report. This website it has been written and created by Brian Wendell to put more information about archaeology out there. Something unique about this website that often you don't have as much is he wanted to create a place that can be interesting for both adults and teens to look at. Brian is a youth pastor and a associate pastor at his church. So with that, he really wanted to not only provide something that can provide some interesting information for adults, but also his teens that he works with can maybe gain an appreciation for what it means to study biblical archaeology. That being said, often you see people get very wordy and try to have these drawn-out articles. On this website, you will find a lot of different articles, but a lot of them are also on the shorter side, just 5-10 minute reads at most. And a lot of them, as you saw in the picture, are just top 10s, top 3s, 3 things to know, things like that, to create different environments for people to be able to feel like I can go in this and get something out of this, even though I am a complete beginner and I don't know what's happening. There are also ones that are on single topics, but again, those are not super deep dives because he wants to make sure that everyone can fully comprehend what's happening. To tribute to Brian Wendell and who he is, this is probably one of the least credible sources that I have, but I also still wanted to include it because it shows that there are some things that aren't as credible as others. But that's not to say that Brian Wendell is not a credible source here. He is well known by other communities. He's the staff researcher and writer for the Associates of Bible Research, and he's also a member of Near East Archaeological Society. But this is where it kind of goes into a less credible, but also shows that he does know a lot about what's going on. It's not completed, but he is currently at Trinity Southwest University to get his master's degree in archaeology and biblical studies. So, that being said, he's not completely there as far he doesn't have like all the fancy accolades, and he's not an archaeologist himself. However, he has done a lot of research and he has been in the area a lot. One thing I would like to say about the credibility of this is with that being so as well, is that he says in his about page that biblical archaeology does not exist to prove or disprove the Bible, which I really loved. I really like that framework of let's just go into and see what happens. Let's look at them separately first so that we don't have one inform the other one, so we can really begin to reconcile what's happening here. But then he follows it up by saying, however, all archaeology absolutely always proves the Bible is accurate. So that's one bias that he lists that's listed under presupposition, so he knows that he's airing that out and saying it. And one other thing of credibility is he is the only writer on this website. So I don't believe there are many editors, if any, and there are not mixed views as far as perceptions on the topic. So you're only getting one person's perspective instead of a group perspective here. But he is very much so. He likes to use his sources. He likes to bring in other research to co-op his own. However, it is, when it's all said and done, his own stuff. The final resource I'd like to talk about is the encyclopedia or dictionary article. So from this I chose encyclopedia.com's archaeology. Now, this is a very large read, to say the least, about all of archaeology and everything that goes into play with it. This does not only talk about Israel, it talks about all types of things from ancient mythology and things like that, and what we can find in the ground from all over the world to support or disprove or whatever for different findings. However, there is a very large portion here on Israel in particular. Being Israel as a site that is one of the most excavated places in the world, it's very, they do mention the significance of it. Now, if you're looking for a completely comprehensive read of everything about Israel archaeology, this is an article to go to. Being encyclopedia.com is very factually based. There's no commentary that goes along with it. It's just fact after fact about things. So just to cover a couple of things that it covers, even though there's so much, it talks about, like I said, the basics of archaeology, the important terminology to know, significant sites, things like that. But they also talk about the methods of finding things, how they found the walls of Jerusalem, dating back to David's reign, as well as different pottery from different areas. So it speaks on different studies and different findings that have been significant. But they also talk about different ways as to which the field of archaeology has developed over the years. For example, it talks about Gezer, how in that they started discovering the strip method to archaeology, where they began finding ways to make it a lot more organized of a process to find more things, not cover up their tracks, but be able to keep things separated so that there can be a clearer view of what happens. And then also they do highlight specific archaeologists as well. So they talk about the big people of Israeli archaeology, their contributions and their findings, things like that. As for their credibility, the website of encyclopedia.com has been around for 20 plus years, basically since the beginning of the internet. It's been here. So it has, obviously long-term support and standing, so there's got to be something to say to that. However, if you want to completely ignore that, they have numerous amounts of editors and cited sources to back up what they are claiming here. And quite frankly, the sources are not internet little reads. They're lengthy, hefty books written by archaeologists, and they are taking the information there and putting it out on paper. So the credibility, I think, is a great amount of credibility. And yeah, that is the prominent resources report.